As the documentation states, a touchscreen button is a button for touchscreen devices used for gameplay, such as controlling a player character, for example. Unlike a regular button, a touchscreen button supports multi-touch, which means that several touchscreen buttons can be pressed at the same time. However, the problem is that unlike control nodes, anchors cannot be set on touchscreen buttons. But I'm here to provide a solution to this issue. To address this problem, we have two options. Either make the touchscreen button behave like a control node or make a control node act like a touchscreen button. In this script, I will demonstrate how to achieve the latter. Firstly, in order to create a custom node, we need to set a class name. I'll name it the interactive touchscreen button, but feel free to choose any name you prefer. Optionally, I'll assign it an icon that resembles a regular touchscreen icon but in green instead of blue. Next, I will define a constant called default values, which will include the values I want to override. Additionally, I will export a variable for the input action, and another variable to determine whether we want to use the default values for the specific button. We can also export a variable to control whether the button will be visible only on touchscreen devices or on any device. Lastly, we need two more local variables, touchIndex for handling multi-touch functionality and released, which will be explained shortly. After defining the variables, in the initial function, we will set the default values. If the useDefaultValues variable is set to true, we will iterate through every key in the dictionary and set the corresponding property to the value associated with that key. In the same initial function, we will check if it's touchscreen only. If that's the case, we will verify if the device has a touchscreen using displayServer.isTouchscreen available. Then, we will hide the button if the device doesn't have a touchscreen. Before proceeding to the input function, let's define some necessary functions. The first one is press, which, as the name suggests, emulates pressing the input action. First, we create a new input event action. Then, we set the action to our input action, set pressed to true, and emit that event in the game. Finally, we ensure that released is set to true. You can then duplicate the press function to create the release function, but this time set action.pressed to false and release to true. Another function we will need is one that determines whether the input event is inside the button or not. To do this, we check if the position.x value is between the button's position.x and the button's position.x plus the button's size, and similarly for the y-axis. If the condition is true, we return true, otherwise, we return false. Now that we have all the necessary functions to create a multi-touch control button, we can write the input function. If the received event is a screen touch and this touch is inside our button, we check if the event is pressed and the button was previously released. In that case, we set our touch index to the event's index. Regardless of whether the button was previously released or not, we press the action if the touch index equals the event's index. If the indexes are not equal, we release the button. Additionally, outside of that if statement, we check if the event's index is equal to our touch index and the event is not pressed. In this case, we release the button. This statement releases the button when the player holds the button and drags it outside the button, then releases it. In that case, we still want to release it. That's it. Check the description for the GitHub repository, or click here to watch this video where I tell you about 5 awesome Godot for add-ons that you probably haven't heard of.